Legendary American actor John Wayne is rumored to have once said, "Life is hard. It's harder if you're stupid." I don't know if he actually said that or not, but there's a lot of truth to that, obviously. And I could not help but think about that truism when I saw a comment earlier today from a United States senator on this very complex situation that we have opened up for ourselves, this war of choice that we started in the Middle East with Iran, and now we're trying to find our way out of it. Anytime you're in a conflict, anytime you're in a war, it's going to be hard. And there is no easy path, and it's going to be challenging under the best of circumstances. But if you are foolish, then something that's very difficult becomes now impossible. I think that's where we are, and I'm going to prove it to you today. And I'm going to have with us back on today Patrick Henningsen, who is a journalist and geopolitical analyst and founder of the news and analyst site 21stCenturyWire.com and host of the Sunday Wire Show. Patrick, as always, welcome back to the show. Delighted to have you here, especially today.
Great to be with you, Daniel, as always.
Well, listen, I always love it when you're on the show anyway, because you always have such good insight. You've had so much physical experience in the region, and so you know a lot of stuff that we can't get from even other well-known guests. So I'm glad for that. But man, this one's you're gonna have to plumb the depths here to maintain composure, I'll say, and then come up with something that we'll talk about what should happen here. Here is Senator Scott yesterday was asked about this situation we have with the war, and the moderator asked him, what should we do? Is there an off ramp? Should we try to just get this wrapped up and move off the deck, or what should we do?
How do you feel like this is going? Should the U.S. wrap this up, get out of there now, or do you think there's more to do there?
I appreciate that Trump's trying to get rid of the nuclear weapons. I don't want to die by a nuclear weapon from Iran. They wanted to kill us. I mean, this appeasement of bullies, I don't know if in your life if that's worked for you guys. It's never worked for me. And so they wanted to kill us. And they're getting close to being in a position to kill us. And they basically have been killing Americans. So I think what Trump did is the right thing. He has to get them in a position that they don't have the ability to do nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles. I think that's where we have to go. I don't know what the right approach is going to be. I think blocking the Strait of Hormuz is fine from my standpoint. If no oil ever goes to China again and their economy is destroyed, that would be a really wonderful day for me.
Where to even begin on that? Let's just start about the first one, because he trots out just a lot of these standard tried and true things that some call them dog whistles or just emotional statements that are designed to make you think a bunch of stuff and not think about any of the fundamentals and come to a conclusion that these leaders want you to, so that the mass of people embrace the wrong things. And let's start off with the first one there, appeasement. It's 1938. It's, the Margaritaville, it's always 5 o'clock somewhere. It's always 1938. Anytime that we're talking about military, here's another one. And he actually tries to mock the moderator. I don't know about you guys. I don't like appeasement. Is this appeasement, though?
Yeah, 1938. Neville Chamberlain. This is one of the favorite tropes. It's either the Sudetenland tanks rolling into the Sudetenland, or it's Neville Chamberlain's appeasement of Hitler. So, Senator Scott, what you have is this problem in America where you have politicians that will graft certain talking points or tropes that get repeated ad nauseum on Fox and other mainstream outlets. And then they'll also blend that with the talking points memos, which they get from their IPAC handler, of which Senator Scott has one specifically assigned to him. And they make sure that they're on point on all of these issues. So that's why you keep hearing all these people kind of sounding basically like the same, really like clones of each other. But it's the danger is when they start mixing them, and this comes from a totally uninformed position. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't understand economics. He doesn't understand geopolitics. He may understand enough about politics in America in order to get elected, in order to raise money to get elected. But once some of these people get in there, it's pretty shocking their lack of knowledge of basic geography, for starters. So the main trope here, which comes from the Israeli lobby, which all of our congressmen, senators are required to hammer home, which is that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Okay, just repeat that enough, and then that becomes most Americans many uninformed Americans, or the people that watch mainstream media, will believe then that's the problem, and Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, and we must stop them, and that Trump and Vance and the team are doing they're doing God's work there by protecting Americans, because of course, if Iran had ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons, they would be able to strike America. We can't allow that to happen, and they'd be able to wipe out Israel, etc. The only problem here, Danny, is that U.S. intelligence assessments, successive assessments, say that Iran is not only doesn't have a nuclear weapon, has never been pursuing a nuclear weapon. But that's the power of the Israeli lobby. That's the power of the control that Benjamin Netanyahu's office has over this White House, is that becomes the narrative, because Israel requires that is the narrative. And that's used to disqualify the other side in negotiations. That's used to create a maximalist demand that is completely unachievable, because it's a maximalist demand about getting rid of something that doesn't actually exist. You can't prove a negative. Iran can't prove that it's not developing nuclear weapons. The burden of proof is on the United States to prove that it is. And our intelligence community, which costs billions and billions of dollars per year, which is a waste of money in many people's opinion, because what's the point of having an intelligence community that produces comprehensive assessments that could get completely shelved, ignored, or usurped by fake Israeli intelligence? If we go by what the New York Times reported in the last 2 weeks, Israel has been stovepiping fake intelligence onto the desk of the president, bypassing our intelligence community. But I'm not letting our intelligence community off the hook, because they're pretty much taking it in the chin. They're not raising any protests about it either. They're just staying quiet and saying, "Oh, I've done my job. There's the report," and just go along and think about the 2028 presidential run, or whatever half these people are into. And so that's the problem we have. This is not a three-way negotiation. This is not a two-way negotiation. It's not the U.S. and Iran. It's the U.S., Iran, and Israel. Israel is part of this two-headed beast that is the U.S. and Israel, which means that the Israelis can run rings around Americans. We change our government every 4 years. Benjamin Netanyahu has been ahead of that country for going on 30 years shortly, okay? He's 25, 30 years. He has been in charge. They have managed to master and perfect the art of derailing negotiations. The entire Oslo peace process was completely micromanaged and sabotaged by the Israelis, and they dragged the United States and Bill Clinton along for show in order to buy time to change facts on the ground and build hundreds of thousands of settlements, and then ultimately torpedo the deal when it was convenient to do so. They can do that to any of these deals, and they use the exact same tactic, which is to put forward a position that the other side could never accept, and then turn around and blame the other side for not being reasonable in the negotiations. And Israel will take it a step further, which is that they will then shoot or kill the negotiators that are across the table, and then turn around and say, "We don't have anybody to talk to." That's
I was talking about Senator Scott here, but I've got to bring in a colleague of his, Senator Cotton, because he said something. I was going to use this in a little bit, but he said something that's very much along the line of what you just said about, look, we're just trying to sound reasonable here. We're not asking for anything crazy. Here's Senator Cotton making that argument.
I think the president has bent over backwards now, going back 9 years, trying to allow Iran to take very simple, very easy steps of turning over their nuclear materials, shutting down their nuclear infrastructure, stopping their support for terrorism. These are not onerous demands. These are something we expect from any civilized nation.
Right.
And the president's going to continue to try to find a way to meet those demands, but he's going to keep the military and economic pressure on Iran until they do.
Just being very reasonable, just a normal country or civilized country. That's all we're asking. But now I'm just going to take my minute here. Something about the 2018 withdrawal that we did unilaterally from the JCPOA that the previous administration, with 2 years of extreme difficulty, had negotiated with the Iranians. The 2020 assassination of their version of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Soleimani, by Trump. The 2024 attack by Israel into the embassy in Syria, and then the U.S. choosing to help Iran in the retaliation that came by shooting down a bunch of drones, the 2025 war, and of course the one we're in right now that we started. But all I'm asking is for them to behave like a rational country and do what they're told. What's wrong with that?
It's just pure gaslighting that Tom Cotton's doing. But that's standard. Anything to do with Iran or Israel, the U.S., all officials are basically doing gaslighting, because that's what you have to do. You have to be gaslighting to follow the Israeli lobby's talking point memos on this. And they must follow these strictly, as do anchors at Fox News and other media outlets that also are in regular contact with those same people. So this idea that Trump's first term, that he was reasonable, that Trump will get up there and Rubio as well and say, "Oh, the JCPOA was a roadmap to a nuclear weapon." No, it's the opposite. The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal put in by the Obama administration, which is one of the only useful things Obama did foreign policy wise, as in 2 terms of his presidency, that basically provided oversight and prevented Iran from developing something they didn't have in the first place. It was a double guarantee.
Let me ask you something on that, because that is something that has puzzled me. The fact that has become a talking point that is across the board with everybody who's friends of the administration, primarily President Trump. He says that on a regular basis. Is it the kind of thing, is this one of the examples to where you just repeat something long enough? Like if I say the sun comes up in the West, as it turns out, it doesn't set in the West, it comes up in the West. And when I first hear that, you're like, well, that's stupid. Everybody knows it comes up in the East. And it's like, no, I'm just going to keep saying it over and over. And then after a while, you start going, well, maybe that's true. Because, I mean, any way that if you know anything at all about the JCPOA, of course, it had significant constraints on the Iranians, et cetera. But Trump literally flips it on its head and said it was a roadmap to a bomb, which is irrational and illogical in the extreme. But yet it seems, I guess people stopped questioning it. Is this a tactic that you're talking about?
Yeah, and Donald Trump's own statement discredits his entire premise, which is that because they had a bad deal, the JCPOA was a terrible deal, et cetera, whatever. And he says, we had to get rid of that because it was a roadmap to a bomb. Well, if it was a roadmap to a bomb and you got rid of it, then how come Iran didn't develop a nuclear bomb in the last 10 years? Okay, I mean, it's like, so he is the level of confidence he has in his gaslighting. And I don't need to be an expert on nuclear science or weapons. You just need to have read Jacques Alli's Propaganda or Manufacturing Consent by Chomsky and Herman, and it's chapter and verse. It's just pure propaganda. But this is like Goebbels level Nazi propaganda, the complete inversion of a reality. This is the type of propaganda that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, because the people just became so detached at some point, didn't believe anything that the leadership was saying, and turned around one day, nobody trusted or even recognized them as the ruling authority. And that's the sort of farcical level that the current government in the U.S. is operating on, specifically. So, but they keep banging this forward because it justifies their positions, which is to undermine and ultimately to not really be serious about negotiating any deal. There can never be a deal.
What he said, because I want to go down this path. We just talked about the JCPOA and how it's not really appeasement because of all the things that have happened here. Let's continue on, Dennis, this, because I want to put the light of the truth on some of the things he said, especially if any of our new members of our audience here. Next thing he said is they want to kill us. They've been trying to kill us for 47 years, and they've killed lots of Americans. Now, this is one of those things I think that does have some truth in it, because there has been some Americans killed by operation actions that started by the Iranians. But how much truth is there?
There's very little to no truth in that statement. They say this is a type of a gaslighting statement. It's to cover up the fact that the United States has slaughtered Iranians.
Yeah, that's where I want you to go.
Yeah, they shot down a passenger airliner in the 1980s. Didn't apologize for it. In fact, I don't even want to use, if I could quote George H.W. Bush, said, "We don't apologize. America doesn't apologize," whatever. They shot down. So when the Iranians, and the other lie they say is that the Iranian leadership are have been saying death to America. The Iranian leaders aren't saying death to America. There are people in crowds and rallies and at mosques that might be saying that. They're saying death to the American regime, the government, the empire that have been killing Iranians. Sanctions have also killed Iranians, just as they killed many Iraqis as well. So the U.S. is the one who's doing all the killing. And firstly, and I'll just say very briefly, the claim that Iran killed hundreds of or thousands or whatever, hundreds of American soldiers
is the number that's
in Iraq, that's a bogus claim. Those were Iraqis. Iraqi resistance. The U.S. was occupying. It was a war zone. The U.S. are legitimate targets in that sense. And it's unfortunate they're there to begin with, but they were there on a legal, dishonest basis of a fake WMD claim that turned into a rollover of an occupation. Okay, that was insurgency, and some of the ones that they're claiming did that were trained by the Americans as well, by Colonel Steele, I believe his name was, who ran that sort of cell under Petraeus at the time. But there's that claim. There's the other claim that Hezbollah somehow is an Iranian proxy. No, Hezbollah is is a Lebanese self-defense force, militia. They are not Iran's proxy. They're an ally of Iran. And just like the United States will spend $100 billion arming the Ukrainians, $100 billion plus, maybe more, to kill Russians. So Russia could turn around by this logic, and they have an actual case there, that Ukraine is a proxy of America that's killing Russians in large numbers and tried to assassinate the Russian president. So, but Iran has done none of that. The U.S. has killed the Iranian leaders. They've slaughtered Iranian civilians, and Iran has done nothing to the United States. Nothing. The only crime Iran has done is they have resisted Israel in the region, and they have defended the Palestinians, and they've aided and supported groups that were pushing back against Israeli occupation in South Lebanon, in Palestine, and also the groups in Iraq that were formed. The Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq was formed to repel ISIS in 2014. Yeah, not America, yeah. ISIS. So, and what did the United States and its allies do to support them? Nothing. They assassinated one of their general or their leading commander, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who's in the car with Qasem Soleimani. So the U.S. is killing the people who are fighting ISIS and al-Qaeda, and Donald Trump takes the leader of al-Qaeda, brings him to the White House for a selfie, which is the ultimate humiliation of every U.S. soldier who ever sacrificed their life and every family member in the global war on terror. That's Donald Trump, a slap in the face to U.S. veterans, U.S. servicemen, by having an al-Qaeda leader doing a selfie and spraying perfume on him in the White House. It's beyond a joke. It's beyond a joke, Daniel. I mean, at this point, I can't take any of these talking points from any of these people seriously. And now he's attacking the Pope. You know,
right?
It's
yeah.
like,
yeah, that's it. But let's not leave Senator Scott just yet, because there's one more egregious thing he says. It might ironically be the worst of the whole lot, and that is the last of it. We were talking about the blockade of oil, and he said, "Well, you know what? I'm generally fine with it. If that gets our objectives done, and oh, by the way, if that means that China gets blocked out of all their oil and their economy collapses, that's a good thing for me." Give me some kind of reaction.
So this is just this kind of zero-sum foreign policy worldview that we need to destroy all of our peer competitors economically. I mean, Marco Rubio has been alluding to this and others. So it just becomes kind of trendy. If you want to seem tough and flexing your geopolitical muscle in Washington, you say just outlandish, stupid things like this. And so how's that going to play out to China? China could say, well, that's death to China. The Americans are saying death to China. That's an actual official there. So it's, so the Chinese can now make a case to their public that the Americans want to do to China what they're doing to Iran, which is killing them, strangling their economy, and then blaming it on the Iranian leadership, saying they're mismanaging the economy. J.D. Vance, they deserve to have a regular life like a normal country, says Vance about the Iranians. He doesn't mention the fact they've been under sanctions for 47 years. In the United States, Vance's government have been choking and strangling the people. And if that wasn't enough, sanctioning them, now they're bombing them, killing them, slaughtering their children in the hundreds and thousands. And these people have the gumption to come on in front of the American people and the world to gaslight us and say that we're the victims and we're under threat. And oh my gosh, the mullahs are saying death to America. Oh my goodness. we're getting to the point now where it's just all these words and all these protestations are totally meaningless from these people.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, I was on Newsmax this morning talking about this blockade issue. And before any of our audience says, "What? You chose to go on Newsmax?" I do. I go on all these because I want a chance to breathe a little bit of sanity in there. I don't want it to just be exclusively an echo chamber. But I came close to regretting it before I'd even gotten on the air, because right in front of me there was a what's his name, Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas, that was challenging Scott to see who could be the worst. And I keep thinking, how many senators are doing this kind of stuff? I just showed you Cotton a second ago, and I'm like, man, the so-called elite in our country are so detached from reality. How can they have any policies that have any kind of positive outcome? Because people are going to react to this. China is going to react. Iran is reacting. Even Iraq is kind of pushing back on some things now. A lot of people in Asia, I'm talking our allies, people in Europe are pushing back. Maloney, Keir Starmer has said no to Trump, et cetera. These things are having a consequence and a cost. The question is, how far is it going to go? And a lot of that depends, Patrick, on what happens next militarily in the Gulf. Now, the next guest or the next person I'm going to show you here is not a senator, but he's in that same category of the twisted elite. Brother Jack Keane is going to be talking about how we're going to very successfully shut down the Gulf.
CENTCOM has established a radio communication net that all ships trying to leave or arrive in the Gulf area will communicate with them. If their intent is to pick up Iranian oil or transport it out, they're not allowed to do that, and we'll tell them where to park. If they test it and they want to sail through the straits and they're not responding to the guidance that CENTCOM is telling them, then we will board that ship. And we'll probably do it with Marines from helicopters, or we can do it from a seaborne as well. Not going to be able to get that oil out of there. That is a fact.
That is a fact, he said. And he makes it sound like it's, it's really not going to be that hard. We're just going to give the order and we're going to shut it down. What do you say?
Well, I like the logic from the Trump administration that so the Straits of Hormuz were open before the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran and started this war. And now Trump wants to reopen it by blocking the Straits of Hormuz. This makes perfect sense, I'm sure. Follow us if you can. Jack Keane is unfortunately permanently caught in the undertow of the military-industrial complex, so he has prescribed talking points that he must follow there. But the thing that was funny about today was this looks like this was Taco Tuesday. I believe China had a tanker that ran right through and right past the U.S. so-called blockade and was untouched, if I'm not mistaken. Completed its transit. So Taco Tuesdays, I like my tacos Kung Pao chicken. Thank you very much for this Taco Tuesday. So yeah, what are you going to do? Start shooting Chinese ships? Are you going to start boarding Chinese vessels? Do you even have enough naval craft and helicopters and teams to be able to? I mean, very easy to run the U.S. blockade. You basically just send, a couple of 4 or 5 ships at once. They might be able to detain one of them, and the others will just carry on. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have the resources to do this sort of thing. And by the way, this is just another way to avoid the obvious, Daniel, because from a legal point of view, there's still a war going on. The U.S. declared war, whether they declared it or not. They're at war with the Iranians. And the Straits of Hormuz is Iranian territorial waters. This is within Iran's direct national security interests. They're at war. And the allies of the U.S., the Gulf states, have used their territory as launching pads to attack Iran. So until this is resolved, Daniel, through either real negotiations, a treaty, some kind of international accord with international guarantors or UN Security Council resolution and plus, until that happens, the war situation, the war alert from the Iranian side continues. So they reserve the right, and it is within their right during a war to do what they're doing for their security. And they're in the right internationally because they were attacked by the U.S. and by Israel for no reason that anyone can articulate other than they want to destroy and wipe out civilization of Iran, to quote the U.S. president. Okay, so until that's why you have to have real negotiations, and that's why these clowns that they sent to Islamabad, which was J.D. Vance, who the 41-year-old man-child there who doesn't seem to know anything about anything, who's talking about nuclear suicide bomb vests 2 weeks before. He's going there with Del Boy and Rodney, Steve Witkoff and Kushner, and their job was to make sure there was no deal. Their job was to make sure that nothing happened. Why? We find out afterwards that Benjamin Netanyahu basically sabotaged, or didn't sabotage, he just gave the orders to pack up and go home. So J.D. Vance then turns around this morning and puts out a statement on X that the reason we left Islamabad was because it became very clear to us that the Iranians didn't have the authority to negotiate, that they kept they'd have to fly back to Tehran to check with the mullahs, and therefore we knew that we weren't talking to the real people here, so we just packed up and went home. But then Benjamin Netanyahu is on record yesterday saying that that Vance had to report to me, and we're very happy, as they do every day. They report to my office every day. And he was on the phone. Vance was on the phone to Trump at least 12 times. So Vance wasn't given authority to do anything but tie his shoes. And it was so important for him when he landed in Islamabad, he took a 4-hour nap because he complained that he was jet lagged. So if it was me as vice president, I would have been preparing on the flight. I might have taken a nap on the flight, but I'd be prepping before and after that nap. And when I landed, it's boots on the ground. I'd have my advisors. We'd already sketched out our positions, our fallback positions, six layers deep. That's what the Iranians did. The U.S. showed up with nothing. They showed up with nothing. They asked the Iranians to see their plan, and they looked at it and they said, you've got to do this, this, and this, otherwise we're going to pack up and go home. That's not negotiations. And for Vance to come out afterwards, instead of, he said the statement this morning to head off this disaster of Netanyahu's statement that totally discredited the administration and proved that they're all Israeli puppets, and proves that the tail wags the dog. And it's just so sad that he even made that statement this morning on X or on Fox. He should have just kept his mouth shut and it would have washed away. But this administration is so paranoid about micromanaging their public relations that they feel they have to do these PR rituals all the time, rather than just shut their mouth and let the thing run its course, and they'd be better off. But they're so crazy about their image, and they're being seen as credible because they're completely not credible, that they have to do these things all the time. And they end up digging a hole deeper. Donald Trump, the president, is a perfect example of this. He cannot let it go. He just has to keep digging himself deeper, like his spat with the Pope is a perfect example. And he roped in J.D. Vance to have a go at the Pope as well. Who said, J.D. Vance took a swipe at the Pope because Trump probably told him, you need to go take a swipe at the Pope to protect me and make me look good, because the Pope's making us look bad over here, J.D., and you're a Catholic, so you better do what's right for the administration. I mean, how far away from reality is that scenario there? Probably not that far.
Yeah, probably not. You mentioned things that are detached from reality. There is, I mean, we could do a whole show easily on the many practical and military challenges of actually shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. How are we going to monitor it? I mean, you just talked about how the Chinese ship went right through already and already challenged it and successfully passed through. What are we going to do with the other ones? All kinds of things like that. So it's very, very difficult. Doug McGregor on our show this morning talking about how you're talking a total of 17 ships total in the area that could even potentially be doing some of this. And we had 180 ships for the quarantine we had on Cuba in 1962 is just kind of a means of comparison to the scope. That's one thing. But now then, instead of saying, holy crap, dude, I'm talking about the inner circle of Trump, we can't make this happen. How are we going to mitigate this? Because this is not going to work. And there's no way going back to Islamabad on Thursday is going to have a different outcome than the first one, unless we change our position, because definitely they're not going to. The war hasn't restarted, so there's nothing to compel them to. I know. Let's put out a plan and say, here's what we're going to do. beyond even the shutting down of the Strait of Hormuz, because that's going to, I don't know what he thinks it's going to do, but here is back to the senators again, Senator Lindsey Graham giving pearls of wisdom.
There are about 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium in Iran that could make a dirty bomb, or 8 to 10 nuclear weapons if it went to 90. We can't end this without controlling that. We have to control the Strait of Hormuz. We have to get the 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium under our control. No moratorium on enrichment. They can enrich. Their homicidal maniacs have been trying to build a bomb. They're not supposed to have 60% uranium. How do you get that? You cheat. 20 nations have nuclear power, but they don't enrich. They get their fuel rods from other nations. We could do that for Iran. No enrichment, non-negotiable. If you give them a moratorium, they'll go right back at it.
Now, Lindsey Graham talks often about the fact that he plays golf with Trump, that he gets on the phone with him all the time, so he listens to him. That Jack Keane has recently said, yeah, when I was on the phone with President Trump the other day, blah, blah, blah. He listens to him. So we can't just dismiss these guys as being kooks, because Trump listens to them and takes actions on them. What Lindsey Graham just said there is a maximalist position. The only way to accomplish what he said is a military conquest of Iran, which we don't have a fraction of the troops necessary, or the bombs necessary, or anything else for that matter. Where does that leave us?
Well, another example is Lindsey Graham has got it down pat from his IPAC handler, has told him that Iran can't be allowed to have a moratorium, otherwise they're going to build a bomb. Again, JCPOA, the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018 under Trump's administration. That was the moratorium. Now they're not bound by anything. How come they didn't make a bomb, Lindsey? It's been 8 years. 8 years. That's a little more than 2 weeks, I think. So they all have different versions of this lie that they keep repeating, which doesn't make any logical sense, which should render them not credible by a press if the press was actually doing their job and interrogating them. But everybody in America will kind of go along with more or less the talking points of, Iran is a homicidal regime. Homicidal regime. There is one regime in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons, and they won't allow inspections. They won't allow the IAEA to come in, and they committed genocide over an occupied population in Gaza, which they are occupying. And they're in the process of a second genocide in southern Lebanon. They're slaughtering Lebanese civilians and Christians, Muslims, Druze. They're targeting holy Christian sites, the Israelis, the IDF, in South Lebanon, 2 major holy sites in the last year, among many others, including archaeological sites, World Heritage, UNESCO heritage sites, and ancient churches in Gaza. Too many Christian churches, Orthodox churches, etc., to even mention at this point, not to mention the 100,000 plus dead. Okay, so who is the homicidal regime, Lindsey Graham? It's not the Iranians. Okay, who started the war against Iran, this last phase of the war? Who started the last one is Israel, and had dragged the United States in, risked World War III for Operation Midnight Hammer, whatever. Fast forward, you started that war. So who? And your president, Donald J. Trump, your boss, is declaring that Iran's going to be wiped out as a civilization if they don't surrender to his demands. So who's the homicidal maniac at this point? This doesn't work anymore. Iran has showed up. They've sent PhDs in political science and nuclear physics and all the rest of it. They sent a qualified delegation prepared. The United States sent a couple of used car salesmen from New Jersey and a 41-year-old vice president with zero political experience. Okay, so
we're on the dominant side. So I mean, what's the problem?
Who are the serious player? The Iranian president comes out and says that he supports and respects Pope Leo and sides with Pope Leo in looking for a diplomatic, peaceful solution to this war. And at the same time, the U.S. president and his vice president, and now half of the Republican war party, are attacking Pope Leo. Okay, so a Muslim president in Iran is saying we need to have good dialogue with the West and come to a peaceful solution, supporting the Catholic Pope, And Donald Trump, who LARPs as a Christian every time there's an election season, okay, he's attacking the Pope and calling him a loser, all this other stuff, and saying that he wouldn't be Pope if it wasn't for me. Trump said that. If it wasn't for me, he would never have been Pope. He was only selected because of Trump.
He should take credit for that, yeah.
He said that.
Oh.
So, this is a president who just basically put himself up as Jesus Christ on social media just a couple of days ago, was forced to retract it. And rather than just keep quiet about it, he had to basically lie and say that it wasn't Jesus. I was a doctor for the Red Cross. And the irony of that is the Royal Order of the Knights Hospitaller, or the Knights Templar, who helped to get Donald Trump elected in New York City in 2016, they came out and basically rebuked him in the strongest possible way. So that's the sort of one of the founding organizations that created the Red Cross way back when, have thrown Donald Trump under the bus for being a liar and a blasphemer to Christians in America and globally. So, Daniel, where do these people come up? When will they get off their moral high horse?
Well,
these senators,
number one, that's not a moral high horse. It's built on fraud. So let's. I don't want to impugn the word moral. None of that.
True.
But the question is, though, what can regular people do about this? Because it is just monotonously put into their heads, especially those that get most of their media from the mainstream media and, from a Fox or a Newsmax or One American News, something like that. If that's all they get, they just hear this stuff incessantly, and they ultimately regard that as reality. I don't know, maybe they can't disentangle what they hear from what they see, but I want to show you one other that's more subtle but much more profound in that. Now, this is something that I'm going to show you here, and Gary, this is a little out of order. This is going to be the one, Vance 2 points. One of the comments that Vice President Vance said upon returning here, he was laying out. You're going to hear him say primarily here something similar to what Lindsey Graham just said about what needs to happen here. But notice what he's apparently unaware that he just admitted. To recall everyone, this war was started because of an imminent threat. An imminent threat. My God, they are 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb. Remember, Steve Witkoff was shouting this from the rooftops, every TV channel he could get on. They're 2 weeks away from getting a bomb. It's an imminent threat. Lindsey Graham saying from this too. Well, listen to what J.D. Vance, I think unintentionally admits here about this imminent threat with the reprocessed nuclear facility of material that he wants to repossess now. Watch this.
There are two things in particular where the President of the United States really said we have no flexibility. We have to get to the outcome that the president said. On the first of those things, what some people call the dust, which is the enriched uranium that the Iranians currently possess, we have said that we want that to come out of their country, and we would like to take possession of it. Now, why does that matter? That doesn't matter, of course, because they have access to that material now. That material was actually buried underground by Operation Midnight Hammer. But if you think about this over the long haul, the president doesn't want to leave the next president or the president after that to be.
Gary, that's enough right there.
We'll
just
so
cut
we would
from
like
there.
to get that material.
Because he just says, this dust, this reprocessed material, they don't even have access to it, according to what he's trying to ask us to believe here. Ergo, it is a literal physical impossibility for them to have been 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb when, according to the Vice President of the United States of America, they don't have access to it and haven't since Operation Midnight Hammer last year. What are we to make of that then? Because he basically just admitted it was a complete lie and fraud that we went into a war, but I haven't heard anyone talking about this on any mainstream media.
Yes, Daniel, correct. But even if it was true, or even if it wasn't true, or even if it was true, if it was buried, if it wasn't accessible, you talk about enriched uranium material, they would then make up a story to say that it wasn't buried. Even if it doesn't matter with these people, they'll just adjust their story to conform to whatever they want to do going forward. And this is what Israel does when they're barking orders at our politicians of how to negotiate. And effectively, the Israel lobby is running negotiations via its proxy in Washington. But there's something else, and a lot of people don't pay attention to the details, Daniel. Okay, I pay very, very close attention to the words of the president. And Donald Trump, and I don't know if we can pull the clip or not, or if you have it, but he's 2 weeks ago, just over a week ago, I think, he was boasting after attacking the Iranian nuclear facilities, the recent attacks on Bashir and the other sites, okay, in the recent bombings, okay, the U.S. and Israel have attacked Iranian nuclear facilities, power facilities. Donald Trump was bragging. He said that, well, there's nuclear dust blowing around and they won't be able to use those sites for a very, very long time. I'm almost repeating verbatim. You can pull the clip and check. And he did. Some people picked that up, not many. And of course, our mainstream didn't touch it. Donald Trump was bragging about radioactive contamination and how that's going to mean the Iranians can't even get near their sites. That's how good of a job we've done in our nuclear terrorism from the USA, bombing nuclear power plants in Iran. Very reckless. What Israel and the U.S. are doing is extremely reckless, could affect the Gulf environmentally, who just 100 miles across the Gulf, the UAE, and all these people, with the wind is blowing radioactive dust. So, and there was no pushback against this. Pull the president's clip. I will stand up here and admit if I get any of that wrong, okay? But that's a huge, huge problem for Donald Trump. And what this White House seemed to have done, this talking point of nuclear dust suddenly appeared. And it's like it got faxed to every news anchor desk in America just a few days ago. And J.D. Vance as well, nuclear dust. What the hell are we talking about nuclear dust? What the president calls nuclear dust. They're running a cover-up for Donald Trump bragging about nuclear contamination from reckless bombing runs. That's what's going on. That's a bit of a problem. And what's even worse about this is that no one in the U.S. mainstream media managed to pick that up.
And have we seen any reports coming out of Iran itself talking about that?
About contamination. I have not seen. I don't know. I have not seen. I'm just going by the words of the President of the United States because I feel that's it should be an official record. But with this president, I know he flip-flops and changes every 5 minutes. But I would hold him to account on statements like that. Because whether and he must clarify what he meant, and even if he tells a lie, like he did with the Pope and the Jesus mem, he has to then that lie has to be told on record. He has at some point to be held accountable. Somebody has to be held accountable for some of these things. So that's that. You know, I'm just bringing that up, Daniel, and I know it's probably not going to be something that people are interested in, because it's not going to make it to the level of headlines. But I think it's serious. And I think that's where that term dust comes from. That's why they're quoting the president to cover for him. That's my opinion, having worked in public relations and watched these criminals operate over the years. That's kind of how Washington works.
Yeah. Well, obviously, there's still like a whole bucket load of evidence that falls in that category, and that's part of my problem. And the question I have of you is that when you're inundated with this stuff like a fire hose of deception, I mean, how are regular people to make sense out of any of this stuff, and how can they ever hold anybody accountable?
That's why we're doing what we're doing, Daniel, to try to open up the conversation, open up the Overton window a bit wider. And this is what all of the independent media and podcasters are doing. This is what the mainstream media is not doing. But what we're doing here is putting pressure from the grassroots to mainstream media and to ultimately to politicians to broaden their discourse a little bit, broaden their scope of analysis a little bit. This is what Larry Johnson and Scott Ritter and John Mearsheimer and all these other great senior experts who come on to these podcasts on their own dime do consistently and every day. And I think this is the only thing at the moment, I think, that is actually having a positive effect, and it is putting pressure on the other layer of the conversation, because I know people in government that watch these shows. Okay. I know people that work in government that watch these shows before they watch the Fox News. In fact, they won't even watch Fox News. They're really just watching podcasts. So, but whether that raises to the level of political consensus is another matter. So, as a journalist, all we can do is try to report the facts and try to open up insights to people to say, look, you might want to consider this. And I've seen my work have a direct effect. In some cases, it made it to the level of being mentioned, at least in a policy discussion that has happened. And so have all of our colleagues in this space as well.
Well, that's good. At least, so let's keep going down that path. Now, one other thing, on a positive note here, there is some evidence that the volume of fraud and lies that have been perpetuated on a normal basis is finally starting to, I guess, maybe crest a little bit to where now it's not being reflexively talked. Now, obviously, it is within the U.S. ecosphere of news media, as I just showed you here on this very show. But overseas, there's starting to be some chinks in the armor. I think I mentioned Giorgia Meloni is pushing back on Trump. Keir Starmer is pushing back on Trump. And even Sir Michael Clark of Sky News, who really tries to never say anything negative against the powers that be, even he's saying this.
It's a move which has baffled a lot of America's allies and people in the region. They say, why are you trying to break a blockade by establishing your own blockade? It's brinkmanship. We were at the edge of Armageddon last week on the 7th of April. When President Trump threatened to destroy the civilization overnight. And we thought we were on the verge of this war spinning right out of control. He declared a 2-week ceasefire, which would expire next Tuesday, exactly a week from today. And so in the middle of that ceasefire, he's going in for brinkmanship to say, OK, well, I will actually squeeze Iran very, very tight. Now, he won't squeeze Iran any more tightly in a week that will make them change their view. But by squeezing the people that Iran is sending oil to, I think he's hoping that they will put pressure on the Iranians to blink first before we get to the next deadline. But it is a strange thing. And a blockade is overtly an act of war. And it is of questionable legality.
Questionable legality. That's a lot for Professor Clark to say there. I mean, do you get any encouragement and hope that, finally some people are calling that out by saying we're really baffled over here?
Yeah, a lot of British, there's been a real defection, especially with former British intelligence, including heads of MI6, I believe, who, and also military as well, high-ranking former NATO officers pushing back on what the United States is doing. And of course, this looks like an ad hoc policy, but that's what you get if the U.S. is acting as a proxy of Israel, which it clearly is. And it's now proven, it's admitted now, then you're going to get only ad hoc policy. There's not going to be any long-term coherent strategy to any of this. And by the way, Donald Trump attacked Giorgia Meloni, G7 country leader. Okay, NATO, Italy hosts the most important NATO bases for the United States outside of Germany. Okay, yeah. It's not a relationship you want to mess around with. And he's basically saying people like Meloni, they're doing nothing to secure the oil in the Strait of Hormuz. I'm shocked. I thought she had courage, but I was wrong. She's a coward. She's unacceptable. And she doesn't care if Iran has nuclear weapons. You see that? She doesn't care if Iran has nuclear weapons. That's an Israeli trope, a talking point that you throw into every argument to create a situation where if you don't support us, then you want nuclear Armageddon. That's the type of gaslighting that the Trump administration, Israel, are engaged in here. And it's going to blow up in their face, because to tell Italians to choose between the Vatican and Trump, I kind of know which way they're going to lean on that. But the other point here, Daniel, is that the U.S., the reason Donald Trump had that tirade that we all remember, we're going to end civilization in Iran, that was a temper tantrum that came after the United States botched that raid on Isfahan to snatch and grab nuclear material. That was Hegseth and Trump's Jimmy Carter moment. And they haven't had to be held accountable for that in the press yet. But it was way worse than Carter's failed hostage rescue in 1980, because Jimmy Carter at least had a moral mission. He was rescuing U.S. hostages, a legal mission. Donald Trump, what was moral and legal about what the United States attempted to do with this special forces debacle, with record aircraft losses, the most lost in a combat operation in over 50 years? Okay, Hegseth should be dragged in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee to answer why this was such a massive failure and how many soldiers actually died and how much do we actually lose and so forth. And then during the Islamabad negotiations, the United States attempted a sneak attack. They tried to run the Straits of Hormuz with 2 U.S. destroyers who had their AIS switched off, were cloaking, pretending to be commercial vessels. The Iranians copped onto it, and they basically said, turn around, we're going to fire. And of course, and the U.S. Destroyers were then told to keep going. And then one last order by the Iranians to turn around, and the U.S. finally tacoed at that point. But they tried during negotiations to do a sneak stunt, to try to draw fire, perhaps to draw fire from the Iranians, and then accuse Iran of ruining the ceasefire. I wouldn't put that past the Trump administration. That's what Israel would do in that situation. They tried that during negotiations. So they came in bad faith. J.D. Vance and Del Boy and Rodney showed up in bad faith, running a sneak attack behind everyone's back during negotiations. What more evidence do you need that these people are not serious about peace talks? They're not serious about negotiations. My opinion, Daniel, they wanted Israel and the U.S. needed a ceasefire to reload and rearm. And I would not be surprised if Donald Trump starts plowing naval assets back into the region again in preparation for another attack, and then do another 8 p.m. deadline, and then followed by a 10 p.m. deadline, followed by this, followed by that, and then another change. So no, we've come to a deal. I've spoken to the Iranians. He said today, I've spoken to the right people. Who are the right people in Iran? Is that Steve Witkoff's buddy? Is that like a used car salesman from New Jersey that's half Iranian? Who are we talking about? It's not the Iranian foreign minister. So like this is dangerous now. This is beyond a joke. These people are not serious. God knows what they're doing.
Gary actually found one of the true socials there that you were talking about with the dust. Gary, if you can toss that up there, because I just wanted people to see that because you were talking about it, so we wanted to be able to show what he actually said. But this just shows that we're in a real world of hurt. And I've only got about 1 minute left here, and I wonder, Patrick, if you can just kind of give your view of the word out this morning, just before we came on air here a little bit, was that there was going to be another round of negotiations on Thursday, that Iran was willing to concede on 5 years of suspended enrichment, not 20 that we'd asked for. That's the only point that I've heard anything on, so I don't know anything else. But what should anyone have any hope that this round would have any success that the last round didn't?
No, and not at all, because Iran already made concessions. The last two negotiations, they tried a sneak attack stunt, and then they basically stormed out of this last one. Iran made concessions, but Israel and Trump, via Israel, whatever, told Vance to pack up and go home. The U.S. had no intention of it, and I think even if they came to some arrangement in the 11th hour, Israel or the White House would come in to basically put new demands in, move the goalposts, which is what they've done every single time, and that kills any chance of negotiations. Here's the statement up here.
The nuclear dust has been very exacting satellite service. Yeah. So again, now 30 seconds from what? If this round doesn't achieve any results like the last one did neither, what's the end game here? We can't just have permanent war, because our country, our allies in Asia and Europe, for example, they can't sustain. It's an issue where the oil is and the urea and fertilizers are not coming out of the Gulf on a regular basis. We just can't sustain that. So then what is the outcome here?
Until the U.S. can do two things. If they can't restrain Israel, because Lebanon and all these other theaters are part of this story, okay? Israel is the only aggressor in the region, the only one, okay? They're at war with pretty much everybody, and they're threatening Turkey as we speak, okay? So that could expand the front to Turkey. Is that what we want? I don't think Europe would want that, but there's some people that don't mind. The United States doesn't mind. They're dug in for the long haul with Israel. But I don't think there's not a serious negotiations. There's not the capability. There's not the intellectual capacity, nor the experience to put together the framework of an actual treaty or an actual deal. It doesn't exist with this administration. And even if it did, Israel would intervene to make sure that they insert maximalist caveats that would undermine and ultimately short circuit any potential negotiations, because they've done that before in the past.
Well,
So
that's what I was gonna say.
it's the record is I cannot bet in favor of any successful negotiations or deals, because that would be betting against all of this sort of pattern of behavior that's pretty damn clear. And because the United States is not sovereign, when the United States is sovereign and it's able to negotiate for U.S. interests, aside from Israeli interests, then we can have a deal. Then we'll have some progress. But until that day comes, there's going to be no chance. It will be a long war, and it will continue until we are somehow able to get this thing that's superglued to the United States, or that we're superglued to Israel, until we're able to split these things apart, and people can act intelligently, rationally as independent thinkers in Washington, and act in America's interests and the world's interests, and not only Israel's interests. I'm afraid it's status quo.
Well,
unfortunately,
that's what we're going to be watching out to see. I got to leave it right there. We have in about 1 minute, we have Commodore Steve Germany is going to be on, and he's going to be talking about from a historical perspective and his own naval experience about how difficult of a nightmare it is to even try to do the blockade. But even more important than that, he's going to talk about the economic implications this has already had that people just don't know about, and what could happen if what Patrick says, and this gets delayed longer, if it turns into something of a forever war, the economic outcome could be dire indeed. Be sure and tune us in 1 minute from now. We'll see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.